Freedom of speech is a cornerstone freedom and a critical prerequisite for religious freedom, political dissent, human rights, and national security. Tyrannical governments around the world understand the importance of free speech and therefore often employ censorship as their first order of business. In the West, we're quickly losing our free speech rights as encroachments seep in from an ever-widening array of Islamic supremacist groups and their leftist allies who think, or claim to think, that freedom from insult, a right which doesn't exist in any human rights document, should trump all other existing rights and freedoms. However, Islamists understand the importance of free speech, and that is why they're working fastidiously to control, manipulate, silence, and ultimately criminalize all speech that sheds a negative light on Islam in a way that's tantamount to Islamic blasphemy laws. At the helm of this push is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC. The OIC is the largest Muslim organization in the world, considered by some to be a proto-caliphate. It's comprised of 56 UN member states, plus the Palestinian Authority, and it's the most powerful voting bloc in the United Nations, and yet most people never heard of it. The OIC's long-term goals are the establishment of an Islamic caliphate and the worldwide implementation of Sharia law. Toward this end, the OIC seeks to criminalize all speech that's negative about Islam. The OIC consists of some of the most egregious human rights violators in the world. And while the OIC demands respect for Islam and Muslims, it shows no reciprocity for the religious minorities who are systematically persecuted in Sharia-controlled territories. Practices such as the execution of gays, forced marriages of little girls, amputations of those who steal, the imprisonment of political dissidents, gender apartheid, and the jailing, flogging, or death penalty for Islamic blasphemers are all permissible under Sharia law and commonplace in the OIC countries. However, if you criticize or even question any of these practices, then you're defaming Islam, a sin worse than the crimes themselves. In stark contrast to the Western concept of defamation, the OIC's definition of defamation includes all speech that sheds a negative light on Islam or Muslims. Truth is no defense, and opinion is not protected speech. And yet, from 1999 to 2010, the OIC deftly maneuvered to pass numerous UN resolutions to combat defamation of Islam. In 2005, the OIC launched a 10-year program of action, a major component of which was to combat Islamophobia. It emphasized that it was the responsibility of the entire international community to combat defamation of Islam. In the West, we assume that Islamophobia is bigotry or prejudice, but when the OIC says it, it means anything that interferes with its Islamic supremacist aspirations. In effect, the OIC's charge of Islamophobia is equivalent to a blasphemy charge. When Wikipedia refused to remove depictions of the Muslim prophet Muhammad from its English language website, that was Islamophobic. It was Islamophobic when Geert Wilders said he's in hiding due to death threats from Muslims, even though it's true. And it was Islamophobic when the EU asked Iran to drop the death penalty for the crime of apostasy. More importantly, despite the fact that the jihadists themselves admit that they are motivated by their faith, if you think that you associate any interpretation of Islam with terrorist activities, then you are an Islamophobe. The OIC uses international legal instruments, multilateral consensus building, and consultations with European parliaments to advance its anti-Islamophobia agenda. Toward this end, the OIC's primary goal was to pass a UN resolution to counter Islamophobia and call on all nation states to enact domestic laws to do the same, including deterrent punishments. And the OIC is achieving its goals in spades. In 2011, the passage of Resolution 1618 to combat intolerance based on religion or belief and its subsequent implementation process, known as the Istanbul process, paved the way for countries, especially targeting the West, to clamp down on speech deemed Islamophobic. The OIC's desire for blasphemy laws in Europe has also made incredible advancements. Sometimes in cooperation with the OIC and sometimes independently, European countries all now have laws in place that silence and punish statements that are public, which defame Islam. The laws go by different names. Sometimes they're called hate speech laws, sometimes denigration of a recognized religion, or public order laws, but they all serve as proxies for Islamic blasphemy laws by deterring speech critical of Islam and punishing it when it occurs. Now many countries in Europe are working to criminalize that speech and not just have it a civil violation. Under the guise of sensitive speech, responsible speech, or politically correct speech, what the OIC really wants to do is to shut you up. The Muslim Brotherhood front groups are also working hard to protect Islam from so-called defamation. Instead of working on the international level, like the OIC, Muslim Brotherhood front groups work on a local level, using grassroots campaigns to achieve the same goals. They operate primarily in the US and Canada, and include the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CARE, the Islamic Society of North America, or ISNA, the Muslim Students Association, and many others. Most are listed in the 1991 explanatory memorandum, which was entered into evidence without objection from the defense during the 2008 Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terror financing trial in the history of the United States. This memo outlines the Muslim Brotherhood's strategy to achieve a civilization jihad in North America, where it plans to sabotage the West from within and supplant it with Sharia. These groups have made great strides. For example, in America, under incredible pressure from CARE, corporations like Nike, Liz Claiborne, and others have changed their products, their package designs, and even their internal production procedures to be sensitive to Islam. Prestigious universities, including Georgetown and Harvard, are intentionally indoctrinating students with false information about Sharia and Islamist political goals. Thanks to CARE and MPAC, Hollywood is now censoring its films to ensure that terrorists are portrayed as anyone except for Muslims. Public speakers are being shut down on campuses, politicians are being skewered for their views on terrorism and refugee policy, and in the US, intelligence and national security agencies have purged from their training material any mention of the motivating ideology of jihadist groups based on advice from Islamists. Here in Canada, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees free expression to all Canadian citizens. But your liberal politicians seem determined to take it away from you. For example, the Canadian Human Rights Act, which established the Human Rights Commissions, had the noble purpose of ensuring equal rights for all. But Section 13 operated to censor free expression. It read, "No person shall publish any statement that is likely to expose a person to hatred based on race or religion." No actual harm had to result. No intent had to be proven. The only requirement was that the communication was likely to expose a person to hatred. So, it's no wonder that for over 30 years, prior to Ezra Levant's case in 2008, the Commission had a 100% conviction rate. After years of hearings, lobbying, and battling politicians, Section 13 was finally repealed in 2013 on a federal level. But then, on a local level, Jacques Fremont, president of Quebec's Human Rights Commission, proposed Bill 59, which, if passed, would have provided the Human Rights Commissions with sweeping new powers to target those who wrote negatively about Islam, even on Facebook or their own websites. And because the Human Rights Commissions don't adhere to the same procedures as criminal courts, it's easier for prosecutions to succeed in the human rights kangaroo courts. Had Bill 59 passed in its original form, its speech-stifling mission likely would not have been confined to Quebec, but would have spread to other provinces. Fortunately, the anti-speech provisions were eventually abandoned. But now, we see the proliferation of anti-Islamophobia motions throughout Canada and the West. So, what is Islamophobia? The term Islamophobia was co-opted by Muslim Brotherhood front groups to silence criticism of Islam. The aim of these motions is not just to shut down speech, but to additionally stifle debate on relevant policies, including border security, immigration, and national security, by shaming those who have opposing viewpoints. At its core, it's a thought-stopping measure. There are two main reasons that Islamists seek to censor this speech. One is to force Muslims to comply with Islamic blasphemy laws, and two is to create a safe space for jihadists and other Islamic supremacists to advance their goals free from scrutiny. In America, H.R. 569, to condemn anti-Muslim rhetoric, was co-sponsored by 145 out of 186 Democrats, but went nowhere only because Republicans retained control. Similar motions and statements are popping up in local legislatures like the Quebec National Assembly, as well as interfaith groups, academia, and other societal institutions. Since crime statistics reveal that hate crimes are targeted primarily against Jews and blacks, how is it that Islamophobia is dominating public discourse? Islamists can't achieve their goals by themselves. Against a backdrop of multiculturalism and political correctness, they rely heavily on their leftist allies to do their dirty work for them. Left-leaning politicians and the liberal elite in every sphere of society are knowingly or unwittingly aiding and abetting the cause of Islamic supremacy. It's the liberals and not the Islamists who opposed repeal of Section 13. It's the liberals and not the Islamists who proposed Quebec Bill 59. And it's the liberals and not the Islamists who passed M103. It's also the liberals in government and the media who repeatedly omit from mention the jihadist motivations for the massacres of Fort Hood, Orlando, and San Bernardino. As the Muslim Brotherhood said, they'll destroy Western civilization from within using their hands, meaning the hands of the infidels, and the hands of believers, meaning Muslims. Let's look now at petition E411, upon which motion M103 was predicated. E411 was initiated by the President of the Canadian Muslim Council and lauded by the National Council of Canadian Muslims, formerly known as CARE-CAN, a Muslim Brotherhood front group. It asserts that terrorist activity in the name of Islam has been used as pretext for anti-Muslim sentiment, that the terrorists don't in any way represent the values or teachings of Islam, and in fact misrepresent the religion, and it claims in essence that Islam is a religion of peace, attempting to dissociate Islam from Islamic terrorism. This petition stands for the proposition that disagreement with its viewpoints constitutes Islamophobia. Its goal is to delegitimize opposing opinions, including policy positions on border security, Muslim refugees, and Islamic terrorism. In short, petition E411 is a piece of Islamist propaganda and disinformation designed to undermine any political or legal efforts by Canadians to properly address the existential threat Canadians face from Islamic supremacy in all its forms. So, how will the language in M103 be construed? What are its implications? And is it cause for concern? M103, titled Systemic Racism and Religious Discrimination, was introduced into the House of Commons on December 5th, 2016 by Liberal Party member Iqra Khalid. It passed on February 15th, 2017, with all Liberal, NDR, and Green Party members voting for it, and all but 2 Conservative Party members voting against it. The text of the motion reads, "In the opinion of the House, the government should recognize the need to quell the increasing climate of hate and fear, which you might have noticed are emotions, to condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, to take note of the issues raised in petition E411, and request that the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage undertake a study on how the government can develop a government approach to stamp out racism, religious discrimination, and Islamophobia, collect data to contextualize hate crime reports, and within 8 months from passage of the motion, present recommended solutions. So what's wrong with M103? First, it singles out Islamophobia by name only. An alternative motion to additionally name Jews, Christians, Sikhs, and Hindus was beaten down by Liberal MPs. Second, for clarity's sake, it was suggested that the word Islamophobia be replaced by anti-Muslim bigotry. But Khalid was unyielding and insisted on retaining that ill-defined term, Islamophobia. Why is that? The fact that this motion embraces petition E411 is evidence that M103 is not merely addressing bigotry or discrimination against people. Rather, it constitutes a push to denounce specific ideas as Islamophobic, including beliefs, policies, and facts that run counter to the ideas expressed in E411. This motion also insinuates that Islamophobia is a form of racism. But what race is Islam? This notion turns the entire concept of anti-discrimination laws on its head, as these laws were forged on the premise that race is an immutable characteristic, and it applies also only to people, not to ideas or religions. Finally, contrary to what the media would have you believe, the fact that this motion is non-binding does not make it harmless or without consequence. It is a conditioned precedent to any binding law to create an environment where ideas contained in the laws are accepted by the public. Moreover, M103's mandate that Parliament provide recommended solutions for Islamophobia forebodes the implementation of government policy or binding legislation down the road. Make no mistake about it, M103 is the first step down the slippery slope of condemning, restricting, and ultimately outlawing speech that is considered offensive, especially Islamic blasphemy. With the rise of ISIS-inspired terror attacks in the West and the influx of Muslim refugees, we'll also witness an increase of anti-Islamophobia motions and conferences. This is no coincidence, but is designed to chill speech that addresses the critical issues of the day. We are in a war, but it is not a war on terror, for terrorism is only a tactic. We are in a war of ideas. It is Sharia totalitarianism versus freedom. It is outrageous that we in the West are taking advice from, collaborating with, and capitulating to the likes of the OIC, CARE, and the National Council of Canadian Muslims. We should not be afraid to assert that the Western values of freedom, human rights, and equality are superior to the Islamist values of tyranny, misogyny, religious apartheid, and blasphemy laws. The idea of multiculturalism is a failure. All cultures are not equal, all values are not equal, and all belief systems are not equal. In this war for the free world, freedom of speech is the battlefield upon which we will win or lose all other future freedoms. In the war of ideas, language is our weapon, and we shouldn't be disarming ourselves with censorship, but should capitalize on all the words we have in our arsenal. Islamists and their leftist bedfellows keep talking about diversity, but clearly have no tolerance for diversity of opinion. The way to counter bad speech is with good speech, not by shutting down the debate. I'm sure that everyone here opposes race, gender, or religiously based discrimination against people. But let's not confuse religious freedom with combating religious defamation. Religious freedom is the right of an individual to freely practice his faith. It is not the right of a religion to be free from criticism. There should be no idea, no policy, and no religion that is off the table for scrutiny and criticism where warranted. While jihadi attacks intensify around the globe, Islamists cry Islamophobia in order to claim victimhood and gain support for their anti-freedom measures. We cannot allow the OIC, the Canadian Muslim Forum, and the NCCM to take the shield of religious freedom and use it as a sword of state censorship. Benjamin Franklin said, "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin with subduing the freeness of speech." Do not let them take 1 inch of it. Be vigilant and keep Canada free. Thank you very much.
Some of the stuff you indicate and said, like reference, say, the UN or OIC or these different things here too, because there's a lot of excellent information there. But I want just to ask if you had like certain, like, say, references or areas that they'd say, well, this is a great site to go to or a document you should read that really explains a lot of this stuff too. Because see, if I'm talking to somebody, say, from the left, that's very, very, very left, because to try and really, because you have to really lay some of this stuff out for them, because it's
Right.
like they're on blinders.
Well, I mean, this speech, I believe. I mean, I know I can't just say, "Oh, believe me," but believe me, I triple checked every single sentence. And it's not going to all be in one space because it was a wide range of issues. I actually wrote a monograph on the OIC. I brought a few with me. If you want to buy one, they're not that expensive. I wrote a book on CARE. I mean, if you Google my name and Sharia, you will see a lot of it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, you can Google specifically the issue, but there's not like there's one place. I have a website, but I don't keep it updated because I don't have any help. It does link to most of the articles, though. It doesn't really link to my books and speeches. If people don't record me, it doesn't get done. I don't have a staff.
Yeah.
So,
But it's just like things like, say, with the involvement care into this situation or whatever. Because like a lot of, let's say, people aren't going to necessarily know this or look this up. But
I wrote a book on CARE. It's called Council on American Islamic Relations. Its use of lawfare and intimidation. It's published under the name CFNS, for Citizens for National Security. They were the publishers, but they put their name on the cover. But I wrote it, and it has case by case by case by case, the legal cases, the corporations, and it's all lumped together by category.
okay.
And then the little monograph, I have some here it's called The Organization of Islamic Cooperation's Jihad on Free Speech, by me, Deborah Weiss.
How much are they?
It's like $15 Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love
Yeah.
to know that. I guess-
Anything? Did any of you have a question that you wanted to ask? Or
I just got here.
oh, you just got here.
Subway wasn't working. I already agreed with what you said. It's there, so.
Oh, you heard it or you didn't hear it?
I heard you down.
Ah. Okay. So should I say anything? Should I say something? Maybe should I just make a remark that you can video or no? No?
I actually have a question for you. So
Okay.
the way the situation is in the United States,
Mhm.
and the way the situation is in Canada,
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on the sort of Canadian situation when it comes to, because we don't have a First Amendment.
That's right.
You guys have a First Amendment.
Right.
Which is super helpful. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the Canadian, as familiar as you might be with it?
Right. Well,
It's done in America, maybe we could do here in Canada.
what was the second part?
Stuff that people like freedom of speech advocates do in the United States that we could maybe replicate here in Canada.
I mean, there really aren't a whole lot of us over there. Unfortunately, I'm concerned about it there too. But obviously, in Europe, especially, it's a big problem. Give me a second to think of how to organize the thought, because it's a bigger problem for all of Europe and Canada for a lot of reasons. One is you guys all signed on to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which does have a provision that's construed as hate speech laws. So the United States is the only country that opted out of that. So we signed the declaration, but we made what's called a reservation, and we didn't sign that. So even though that's number one. Number two, your Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms has another clause that's open to interpretation that says something about you can't use speech that's likely to disturb the peace or something to that effect. And I think when you're using the word likely, that's a problem. How are you, it's anticipatory, and how are you going to know? And not only that, you're putting the responsibility on the actors who are riotous. I mean, you're putting the responsibility on the speaker instead of the actors who are riotous. This is actually called a test of consequences. That's something that the Organization of Islamic Cooperation advocates for. So I'll just go, I don't know, I'm rambling. I guess I'm rambling, I'm sorry. But in Resolution 1618, we signed it. You'll hear people saying that, when I say we, I mean America, just to be clear. We signed it, and you'll hear people saying that, oh, Hillary Clinton was trying to stifle our speech, and we signed it to, to protect us from defamation. None of that is accurate, because there were resolutions, as I said, for years that were called combating defamation of religions. I mean, when you looked at it and analyzed it, it was of Islam only. But the purpose of Resolution 1618 was to preserve free speech. It was finally when America woke up and realized, oh, wait a minute, this has implications. They're using the word differently than we are. Maybe we shouldn't be signing those resolutions. And Hillary Clinton, the State Department, did ask the OIC to draft an alternative resolution that would preserve free expression and still combat discrimination. But there was one clause in there. There were a few problematic clauses, but the big clause that turned out to be an issue was it said would criminalize incitement to violence. And the reason we signed it is we already have laws like that. You can't incite, well, it's imminent violence in America. But so we thought, well, that's okay, because we already have that law. But then what happened was, turns out they interpreted it differently. Because, incitement to violence in America is if you specifically say, go kill Joe tomorrow at 3, and then you go do it, then I would be responsible for that inciting speech. But our laws are so liberal that it's like, if you say death to America, that's legal. If you say kill all the Jews, that's legal. It has to be very specific, like go at 3 o'clock, these people, and then, but that the OIC doesn't even interpret it like that. They interpret it like if you draw a picture of the Muslim prophet Muhammad, and then there's riots all across Denmark and Europe, then the people who are responsible for the death and mayhem are not the rioters, but the people who drew the cartoons. So it's a test of consequences instead of a test of, and where are you placing the responsibility, on the speaker or the violent people? So it's very different. But just not to exonerate Hillary Clinton, by the way, but by the time that Resolution 1618 passed and the implementation process was started, I don't know what the heck happened, but the whole view of how to interpret it from her was changed. We'll use peer pressure and shaming, she said. We have a First Amendment, but we'll use peer pressure and shaming to get the same result. And then the implementation process, which she was very active in, actually is comprised of a whole bunch of outreach programs and training seminars worldwide, which are in effect to have policies that are sensitive to Islam and avoid Islamophobia. So I don't want to exonerate her. Anyway, I'm probably rambling. In America, we do have the First Amendment. I don't think we should take it for granted. There is a push, as I said, by the left. There is a push to restrict hate speech. And then when people who blow this off, when they blow it off, whether in America they say, oh, don't worry, it won't happen here, we have the First Amendment, or oh, don't worry about M103 in Canada, it's non-binding. That is just bull, because it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. If you have a violent coup, that could happen overnight. But when when it's a political movement, then it is a process. So it starts with self-censorship, then you see policy restrictions, you see speech codes and safe spaces on campuses, then you wind up having civil violations, and criminalization is the end result. Additionally, in America, so you see, we have virtually all the Democrats who want to condemn certain speech. There is also a push to conflate speech with violence. You'll see sentences that don't even make any sense unless you pick them apart, because they try to conflate it. And just so you're on notice, now a lot of these groups are using the phrase hate incident. Don't think that means it's a hate crime. Hate crime has a legal definition. Hate incident, they're constantly throwing speech in there. And when they say reports, like hate incident reports are going up. A lot of these reports are initiated and encouraged by Muslim Brotherhood front groups. If you research a lot of them, they're not accurate, they're not, some of them are completely fabricated, some of them are their interpretation. What's a hate incident? Oh, if you looked at me cross-eyed, I can go report it and say it was discrimination, and they'll include that. So you have to be very, very discerning in analyzing the data. In terms of what you can do, I think it's totally great that you guys have started free speech clubs on campuses. That's amazing. That, as I said when we were on our way over, that's a suggestion that I've made. I don't know that I'm in the position to do it myself. I'm not in college anymore, but I think it's a great idea. I definitely think people should do it in America also. I don't think we should take it for granted. If you survey college kids today, they don't support free speech the way it's interpreted by our First Amendment. They think we should have hate speech laws. And actually, a lot of people think we do have them. I can't tell you how often I speak around the country in America, and people will start telling me about our hate speech laws. I'm like, what hate speech laws? We don't have hate speech laws. And then I have to explain to them, we have hate crimes laws. I'm not, that's controversial, but we don't have hate speech laws are when it's speech alone without accompanying violence. And all it takes is a majority of the Supreme Court justices to have a different interpretation, even if it's the wrong interpretation, and then we could have hate speech laws. I mean, we have a divided court now, and you see what happens with whether it's, the Second Amendment, anything. If everything was so clear and a foregone conclusion, we'd have a unanimous Supreme Court ruling on every single constitutional issue, but we don't. So I think the main thing is number one is education, and to understand the importance of it. I don't think people understand the importance of it. They all think they're being sweet and nice, and let's not say anything mean to each other, and they don't understand that it's a package deal, and that, I can tell you right now, I'm not doing all this work to support, there's a whole list of words that if you use them, you wouldn't be welcome in my home. All kinds of bigoted words. If you did that, I wouldn't really want to be around you. But that doesn't mean you should have a criminal penalty. That doesn't mean you should have a civil penalty. That means that when you say those things in an open space or wherever it is, someone else should be able to say this is why it's wrong. If you outlaw it, it's still gonna, what are you gonna do, drive it underground? Or I just think that people completely don't understand the role that freedom of speech plays in all other freedoms. Like that, as I said, that's why I tried to frame it that way, because the debate winds up being focused on such a narrow area, and it's hard to really form have a well-informed conclusion if you're just starting from yesterday, But if you look at the Sharia-controlled territories, for example, okay, take like the Islamic Republic of Iran, right? they don't have a civil constitution and then you do your religion on the side, which is how we have it here and how we have it in Canada. You know, we have a civil law, and if you want to be religious, you do your own thing. There, the Quran is the Constitution. And that's true even if you're, you know, Zoroastrian or Baha'i or whatever other religion, you still have to adhere to that Quran. So, the two laws that are always the most threatening to Islamic republics are blasphemy and apostasy. And a lot of times what the people get charged with is national security violations. Now, how can that be? But if you're an Islamic republic and you're trying to convert people out of Islam, it is a national security threat. So if, you know, and religious freedom, like what good is having religious freedom if you can't pray in public, if you can't pray at a church, if you can't say what you think, if you only have that freedom in the privacy of your own home, or, you know, you can't have political dissent. If there are human rights violations, you can't voice them if you're not given free speech. So it's an oppressive tool, and I just don't think people understand the roots of it. I think there's a push. It is by the left. Sorry. I mean, I used to try not to be partisan, and I'm not partisan. It's not like I love the Republicans in America. I truly don't. But if you do it by ideology, and I'm not in sync with everything they do either, but it's the left that wants to shut everyone up, and the reason is they don't want their ideas challenged, and they want big government. You know, a different kind of big government than the Islamists, but, you know, as I said, the way they always start is they burn the books, and then they take away your guns. So that's how it starts. So I think educating them on the importance of it, and in my personal view, a little bit secondarily, is also a values issue. Like, do you or do you not believe in personal responsibility? I can tell you right now that there is nothing anybody could say to me that would make me, and I'm saying that, make me punch you in the face. Nothing. You know, you could insult my mother, you could insult my looks, you could insult, there's nothing. But according to this, you know, if you draw a cartoon or you say something, they can kill you, and that's okay. So, you know, I hate to say it, and now I don't know, I'll probably get skewered for saying this, but even the Pope, which Pope it was, when he said something about, well, you know, that's what you can expect if you insulted my mother.
Francis.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's just not accurate. That's not a Christian view either. That's not what you're supposed to expect. The Judeo-Christian view is you are responsible for your own behavior. You don't push it onto somebody else, and you certainly don't push it onto violence. The way to counter offensive speech is with more speech, not by punching them, killing them, flogging them, jailing them. So education and values, and that's all you can do.